Hey guys, welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. I have an awesome story today. Imagine being married for many years, or even if it's just another family member, and you are separated during a wartime and you have no idea what happened to them, the emotions and everything that goes into that. Well, today's story goes over a similar situation that took place back in World War II. I really think you guys will love it, so listen along and we're going to dive into this incredible story. This story takes place in like the late 40s, early 50s kind of time area. It didn't really have like an exact date, but going from the story, you can just see when it would have been written or placed on paper. There was a man by the name of Paul Deutschman. Now, there was a day he got onto a New York subway and it was packed, like all New York subways usually are, and there were no seats when he first got on. But right before the doors closed, a young man got up kind of near him to get off, where then Paul quickly grabbed the seat. He was, exhausted that morning for some reason, and he was just like, oh, finally, I get to rest my legs going into town, because he did have a good 30-minute ride. He was used to New York, and Paul knew that, well, on a New York subway, that's just not the best place to strike up a conversation with just random strangers. Paul worked as a photographer, and he had this weird knack of just this thing about analyzing people's facial expressions and features. But I guess that kind of goes along with, he's a photographer, so makes sense. Well, when he sat down in that seat that day on the subway, he sat next to a gentleman that looked to be about in his 30s, somewhere in there, and he just had this look in his eyes, Paul said, that just looked so full of despair and sadness. And Paul was trying to be discreet as he could, not trying to be a weirdo, staring at who's right next to him. But he just couldn't help but notice this man. And the man, he had like a newspaper, and the newspaper itself was written in Hungarian. And when Paul saw that, the newspaper, he couldn't help it. He had to ask the man a question. And he just kind of randomly said really quick, he said, I hope you don't mind if I look over there at your newspaper. And when he asked the man, he asked it in Hungarian. Well, doing that shocked the man. He was kind of like, what? Hungarian kind of a look. And so he answers Paul back and he tells him, he says, yeah, you can read it now. I'll have time to read it later. Well, like I said, the ride into town was about 30 minutes. So the men just started chatting, seeing that they had something like that in common. They started getting along very easily. The man's name that was sitting next to Paul that day was Bela Paskin. And Bela, he had been a law student when World War II started. Well, once the war started, Bela put into a German labor battalion, and then he was later sent on to the Ukraine. Sometime after that, he was caught by Russians and put to work, and the work was he had to bury the Germans that had passed away during the war. Once the war was finally over, though, Bela went on foot. Hundreds of miles. He had to get back to his hometown, and that was the town of Debrecen. And that's a large eastern Hungarian city. So that's where he and his family had lived before the war started. Well, as the two men are talking, Paul says, oh yeah, I know that city. I know it well. So Bela continues on with his story. So once he had traveled all those hundreds of miles on foot, Bela got back to Debrecen and he went to the apartment where he and his family had lived. Well, when he got there, his family wasn't there. In fact, there were strangers living in the apartment building, and he's talking, he's giving the names of all his family, but they're just kind of looking at him like, We don't know them. We're not sure. I'm sorry. Well, of course, Bela leaves that day, walking down the road. He's feeling dejected. And as he's walking, leaving, some little boy starts running after him. And he's yelling, Paskin Baxi, Paskin Baxi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And what that means is Uncle Paskin. Well, the boy happened to be the son of some old neighbors that still lived there or near there when his family were living there. So the little boy takes him back to his parents, and Bela speaks to them. And they told him, quote, "Your family is dead. The Nazis took them and your wife to Auschwitz," end quote. Well, in the next few days after that, of course, he's devastated and distraught. So Bela leaves on foot once again, and he goes and he has to steal from border to border, crossing over each one, to get food and live because he has no money. And so he does that until he gets to Paris. From Paris, he managed to immigrate into the U.S., and that was in October of 1947. When he did that was just 3 months prior to meeting Paul on the subway. So Bela's continuing his story that day. The men are still in the subway, and as Paul's listening, he can't help but say, or think anyway, something about this guy's story is just very familiar, and I can't put my finger on it. And he was thinking, and Paul finally, a light bulb kind of goes off, and he's thinking, oh yeah. So recently he had gone to a friend's little get together, a little house party or housewarming of some sort. And that friend had, of course, more friends. And so Paul met a woman there. Well, he struck up a conversation with her that day, and Paul and the woman, he finds out that the lady was from Debrecen, and she told Paul everything, how she had been to Auschwitz, and from there, she had been taken to a German munitions factory and put to work. She told Paul that, the rest of my family, they were taken to the oven chambers, and, this was it was such a sad story. Sometime after that, the Americans came and liberated her and many others, and they brought her back to the U.S., and she says that she was on the first boatload of displaced persons to come back. I mean, just an incredible story. Well, that day that she told it to Paul, he was so moved that he just had to get this woman's name and number. And the reason being, he wanted to invite her maybe to come over sometime and meet Paul's family, just because he knew she had been sad, she had lost so much. He thought that would be a nice thing to do. Back to the subway, Paul's thinking, he's like, there's got to be a connection here somewhere between Bela and this woman. There just has to be. So Paul looks over at Bela on the subway, and he says, was your wife's name, was it Maria? And as soon as he asked that question, Bela's face went white as a ghost. I mean, drained of every color. And he says, yes. How did you know? So Paul says, all right, as soon as the train stops, we're getting off at the next stop. So they get up once the train stops. They exit the train. And during this whole time, Bela just is almost like he's in a trance because he's just shocked and doesn't know what to do. Paul walks to a phone booth, and he dials the woman's number. Now, it felt like hours before the woman picked up because they kept calling and no one was answering. And the reason being is because Bela Paskin, she never picked up the phone. Yes, I said Bela Paskin, and she never picked up because she didn't really have that many friends. So anytime she used to pick up, it'd be for one of her housemates or something. So she just never did. But this phone just kept ringing and ringing that day, so she finally answers it. So Paul introduces himself. You remember me? You met me at such and such. And he asks her a question. He says, Can you describe your husband to me? And of course, she was a little taken back and didn't quite understand why he was asking that, but she's like, oh, Okay. So she describes him to Paul. Then Paul asks her, where in Debrecen did you live? So Maria tells him her old address. Paul then turns to Bela, who's standing right there at the payphone with him, and he asks Bela, what was your old address? He turns to Bela right there and he asks him if he and his wife at some point had lived at that address that Maria had just told him. And Bela immediately, yes. And he's still white, pale, and so shocked at what's transpiring right now. Paul even says that Bela's whole body was just shaking and trembling uncontrollably. Paul tries to calm Bela down. Look, it's okay. It's all right, calm down. He then says to him, quote, something miraculous is about to happen to you. Take this telephone and talk to your wife. Bela immediately had tears just welling up in his eyes as he took the phone from Paul and puts the receiver up to his ear. The moment he heard his wife's voice, he broke. And I mean, he broke down, just screaming, this is Bela. This is Bela. Paul just stood there watching as Bela just hysterically mumbled and wept, and you couldn't understand him because he was just so overcome emotionally. So Paul takes the receiver gently back from Bela's hands that were shaking all over the place, and he talks to Maria again. He says, stay put. And as he's talking to her, he can tell that Maria is also hysterical and weeping and trembling. So he says, it's all right, stay put. We're going to be at your house in just a few minutes. They hang up and, Bela is still uncontrollably just emotional wreck, but in a good way, I guess. So he just kind of screams out, it's my wife. I got my wife. Paul certainly didn't want to intrude on this just incredible, miraculous moment for the two of them when they're reunited. So what Paul did is he hailed a cab down, and then he paid for it, told the driver where to go, puts Bela in, and he wishes him well. And he's so happy for them. And the two say goodbye, part their ways, and the cab takes off. Now, it is said the moment that Bela and Maria saw each other for the first time, it was almost like it was electric. I can't imagine how that must be. They both released so much emotion that had been pent up, Bela not knowing where his family was till that family in Debrecen told him that they had all been killed, and here his wife hadn't. The reunion of it was just, what an incredible blessing. And both of them, just couldn't believe, wow, the events that had transpired. Maria even said later on that, she was always a little bit worried every time Bela would leave the house, whether it was to go to the store or what, because she always thinks back to when World War II, and he disappeared that way and never came back home. So she just had that kind of PTSD about it a little bit. But as time went on, she was absolutely confident and, that nothing would reoccur and happen like it did back in World War II. Nothing like that to that extent again. So I just a beautiful story. The book had a quote by Bela at the end in this story, and he said, "Providence has brought us together. It was meant to be." End quote. Just a cool story how two people that went through horrific things, but they found each other when they thought that each other was gone, pretty much. Just incredible. Let me know what your thoughts are on this story, if you enjoyed it. And I thank you for watching, guys. I appreciate it so very much. And I hope you guys have an incredible rest of your week. And I will see you for the next one.